Good morning and welcome to Arctic Game Talk. My name is Johan Linder and this is my colleague
Kristoffer Wiker.
Nice to see you again.
Thank you.
So to start with some Arctic Game Lab news then. We have unfortunately some sad news. The Arctic Light Pitch that was planned for the 17th of December has been cancelled due to too few registrants. That's sad, but that's things that happen. The next pitch opportunity will be then for Arctic Game Pitch, which will be during the first quarter of 2021. And that will be a part of the Arctic Game Pitch and the pitch contest we host. So start preparing for that.
Yes, and tomorrow there will be a Game and Fika, the digital version that is, where we gather to talk about games, exchange games, ideas, and develop experience and inspiration. Whether you're a musician, developer, communicator, graphic designer, or just curious about the game industry, you're welcome to join us.
Fantastic. And then I have Emma Prieto with me today. Emma, you just started something called Arctic Game Changers together with some other good people from your network. Can you please present what is it?
Yes, hi. Can you see me? Yeah.
Yeah.
We started a group on Facebook for now called Arctic Game Changers. We're hoping to expand and do things in real life too soon, hopefully. I don't know. We'll see about the COVID situation, I guess. Right now there's 67 people in the group, going closer and closer to 70, so that's fun. There's a poll right now with questions about what people want to do with us and how we can help them. So we're hoping to present more about Arctic Game Lab, go to game jams, doing things together with a female and non-binary group in the gaming industry.
And it's exclusive for those groups?
It's for everyone who's interested in the gaming industry, who's female and non-binary, but it's not for men.
Great. And that's just a network up here, or is it a part of like a bigger network, or how does things look?
Yeah, it's the whole Arctic Game Lab area, so it's the whole northern Sweden. It's so Boden, Piteå, Umeå, Luleå, Skellefteå. Did I miss any of them? Well, and and the cities surrounding them. And you don't have to be from around here, but you have to have a connection or an interest for what's happening up here. And hopefully, right now at least, the majority is from around here. So
fantastic. I'm happy you could join us. And if you're a female or non-binary and wants to get into the games industry up here, just join the group. Could you just post the link to the group in the chat as well? That would be great.
Absolutely.
Fantastic. Thank you very much, Emma.
Thank you.
And on that note, Global Game Jam Online, we remind you again that the 27th to 31st January 2021, there's going to be the Global Game Jam online version. Anyone who wants to participate in experience creating games together should apply. And anyone can apply, even if you're just into knitting or architecture or game design for that matter. It doesn't really hinder you to participate. Come join. It's going to be fun.
Cool. Then we have another event arranged up in Luleå, and that's the Music and Games. It will be held the 10th of February in Luleå, as I said. And that's a great initiative to strengthen the music industry up here, to be a part of the games industry. We have a lot of talent, a lot of good producers, good studios, and so on. So I think it's an opportunity. And for this event, we will have some real seniors from the business. We will have from Paradox, the ones driving the music department in Paradox, for instance, and some others that are really heavy into this. So I think it could be a really interesting opportunity to connect and make the games industry and the music industry meet.
Really? Yes. And as this is the last Arctic Game Talk for this year, we're gonna get back to you all who participated during this year with some questions. The plan is to continue next year as well, but we would like your input, and we'll send out a questionnaire to everyone who registered.
Nice. All right, over to some local news then.
Yes.
We have Captain Sabertooth and the Magic Diamond that was published by the Umeå company Sordix. It's among the top 10 games of 2020 and is picked by family video game database readers. So that's really, really good. Good for you, Sordix.
Yes, cool. And on the local note, Nordsken, how's it going?
It's going well. I'm really happy you asked that question. We actually received word this morning that we have received funding for the coming 3 years for Nordsken. So that means we're going to have 4.5 million Swedish crowns to spend over the coming 3 years to continue develop Nordsken. And
Nice.
that means also be growing the Arctic Game Conference and also the fantastic conference that we've been developing. So yeah, that's amazing.
Fantastic.
There's going to be some changes. We are quite uncertain that May is a good date for events. We think it's too close to everything that's related to COVID-19. So it's going to move to the autumn break, week 44, first weekend of October, or last weekend of October. And we're also going to move the event down to the city center and the new culture house, Sara.
Nice.
So it's going to be interesting. It will definitely change the event in a lot of ways. It's a different arena. It's some things will be removed and some will be added, I think, and it's going to be an interesting change. But we're really, really happy that we can make a great conference and a great Nordsken again next year.
So always evolving then.
Yeah, so you should just put it in your calendar and mark those days that you're in Skellefteå then.
Yeah, cool. So, and on that, if you have any more news that we should bring up in these talks, then please send them to news@arcticgamelab.com.
Yeah, some global and event news then. We just saw that Starbreeze has paid off most of its creditors now. They've been quite troubled with heavy financial burdens for a long time now. So we're really happy to see that Starbreeze actually keeps the mouth above the water.
Yes. And Control becomes the latest growing Remedy IP since Max Payne. Developer Remedy Entertainment has announced that the third-person supernatural adventure Control has sold more than 2 million units since launch.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And then we have a theme park opening, the Super Nintendo World theme park, set to open the 4th of February 2021 in Japan. And that's amazing. I mean, I would love to go there.
Me as well.
Maybe a hard opening date, I would say. We just hope for them that COVID is over by then.
Yes. Oh, Mario Kart. It's as a wow.
Yeah.
Okay, sorry, fanboy moment there. So Sony, Microsoft, Nintendo, they all unite on a new set of safety principle for online gaming. These three big movers in the industry has more or less the effective control of the entirety of the console market as it is now, have announced that they will share a set of safety guidelines for how they'll moderate and police their online platforms. This is due to the increase of cross-play between the games and the game consoles, and make it easier for players and for them to police it as well.
Good. We also have some news that the Huawei app gallery is growing. The Chinese mobile developer Huawei has taken large steps to be stronger in the app market and compete harder with Apple and Google Store. And their own app store, app gallery, is growing quite largely. And they are also pushing it. In a press release recently, they announced that app owners will receive up to 90% of ad revenue compared with 70% which is what Apple gives to its developers, and they will have a tier of packages to support developers going into Huawei. So I think it could be interesting for those that develop that kind of games.
Really cool. On another note, we're seeing a new movement within the game industry, and that is that artists and people with recognized names and faces are showing up in the game industry. Vin Diesel is now in an Ark 2 developer. He has joined Studio Wildcard as an executive producer for Ark 2, which the game he's also starring in. This is his title is going to be creative president of creative convergence. Sorry, as well as playing the main character Santiago. He's also going to appear in the animated series of Ark that's going to be released at the same time. But this is not his first foray into the game industry as well, because he founded Tygon Studios back in 2002, which contributed to the development of the Chronicles of Riddick, Escape from Butcher's Bay, and Wheelman and Fast and Furious Crossroads as well. So,
yeah, really interesting. I mean, this is maybe something we can hear more about later as well. I think it might actually go into the IP part of games.
Yeah,
it would be interesting to hear Robert and Yasin discuss the topic later.
Yes.
All right. We also have news that Swedish Game Awards has been handed over from the KTH student department, etc., to the Swedish games industry, dataspelsbranschen. So they will continuously support the award and make it good, big, and great.
Yeah. So then events. Pocket Gamer Connect Digital number 5, which will be online. It's on Monday, February the 8th to 12th next year. It's going to be really early.
Yeah, and good for all mobile developers out there.
Yeah.
We also have the UK Games Expo coming up 4th to 6th of June. It's going to be a physical event, perhaps with a digital part. But it's a great event for those that like IPs and those that like analog games.
Yes.
Amazing event.
Really. And Angoulême International Comic Festival. It's going to be held in France on 24th to 27th of July. It's the second largest comic festival in Europe and their third largest in the world.
Yeah, and of course, GDC 2021 needs to be mentioned. It will be held July 19 to 23, hopefully taking place physically in Moscone Center in San Francisco, but it's also going to be a robust virtual online offering.
Of course. Offline. Yeah, it's going to be interesting. Gamescom will return the 25th to 29th of August next year as well. So here's hoping that the pandemic will be gone by then.
And we also should mention that Arctic Game Lab is planning to go there.
Of course.
With a lot of followers. So that's going to be good.
So today's speaker.
Yeah, Yasin and Robert, welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Thanks.
Shall we begin with a little introduction maybe?
Please.
Yes, I'm Yasin Hillborg of Runatyr. I am creative director at Runatyr, and like you said, I'm joined by Robert Bäckström. My background is from film and TV production. I'm passionate about audiovisual storytelling, games and film, but maybe my biggest passion is music, and that's why in 2011, my documentary on Swedish hard rock and heavy metal premiered, which is conveniently on the wall behind me. So that's a little bit about my background, and I'll pass the mic to Robert, and I'll try to share my screen in the meantime, I guess.
The tech side. Yeah. So my name is Robert Bäckström. I'll be sort of active within the Arctic Game Labs community. So some of you might have met you. Short story. is I've been in the games industry for quite some years. I was part of one of the people founding Fat Shark, even though if not the original ones, but the first employee in. I stayed with Fat Shark for 15 years, I think, left for Raw Fury 2 years ago. And this summer or August this year, I decided to focus fully on the game studio Limit Break that I started together with some students from the indie game development in Boden. We now expanded, so we are present in Skellefteå, Piteå, Umeå, Stockholm, and Malmö as well, and Karlshamn, latest edition as well. Also along this, I've been working with Yasin on starting Runatyr, which is like we'll go into what Runatyr is about for this talk.
Yeah. Okay. Shall I guess I could with that I could begin and talk a little bit about us. Runatyr is an IP studio based in Stockholm. And we develop IPs for computer games, graphic novels, and film. And IPs, of course, are intellectual property. And this talk will be about both from a philosophical standpoint to a practical one. So what approaches we use in developing our IPs. So 3 legs of IP development, and those legs are authored, acquired, and collaborative or shared IPs. And authored IPs is, well, I mean, that's basically us creating an IP from scratch, creating a world or based on an original idea. And for us to kind of how we the IPs we would choose or we would that we appreciate will have to have something new to offer the audience, and then we have acquired IPs, and that's basically IPs that are already. I mean, that's basically IPs that could be licensed and hopefully optioned optioned and then hopefully licensed down the line, and that could be, of course, established IPs, or it could be a fairly unknown IP where we see potential, and then I mean, an established IPs. I mean, there's the price range. Will be higher if it's an established IP, of course. And then we have shared and collaborative IPs, and that's IPs that we develop with a game development studio or a production company or a scriptwriter. And we can go into examples of that throughout the talk, and I think with that, I think I'll pass the torch to Robert for a while, and then I'll get back.
I'll do that little beep when I want you to change the slide. So let's go on. I'm gonna start talking about. So there's a lot of talks about IPs, and I'll put in a little notion here that my background being mostly game, so some of these things might be biased from like a game context, but I think a lot of it can be applied on any IP. So I mean, and I guess if you want to define an IP, or how I like to define an IP, and I think it's a sort of a common knowledge, it's an expression of ideas, and it could be, but not excluding like characters, stories, source code in terms of a game, but also the branding, the box design around it. And I think when you start thinking about it, like the distinction between a brand and an IP can sometimes be somewhat blurry. So there's the IP or brand of Lego. I mean, I think that example we see here with the Lego Star Wars, or all the different type of IPs takeovers by Lego which itself is an IP or a brand, and then there's the original IP of Star Wars, and that mix, you see, mostly I'm not trying to sort of explain exactly what's happening there. I'm just putting this as an example that there's definitely some difficulty sometimes to sort of define what's a brand and what's an IP and the meaning of it. But for now, I think it's just we have an understanding of an IP being like a collective of ideas. So if we go to the next slide. So I think it's quite interesting to talk about the value of an IP, and I like to see it as two different parts. Like every IP, hopefully, or all IP do have a creative value, or which is like a creative quality, which is obviously something that can be more or less, and I guess it's also a bit subjective in terms of what you find being a good quality IP. But that's one part of an IP. If you start talking about an IP as a commercial commodity or asset, you also need to think about its commercial value. And the commercial value is sort of something that is happening or becomes a result when it is interacting, I say, or introduced, or like how well it is received by the audience, and how much the impact it has on the audience, because obviously the audience is what drives monetization or commercial value of it. So I think it's important to understand the distinction between the qualitative or the creative value of an IP and the commercial value. And obviously, depending on where you want to go with it, the importance of the two different are different. So if we move to the next slide. Can you change slide?
Yeah, I tried. I heard a scary internet disturbance noise. Okay, but we'll see. Yeah, this one.
Actually, go back.
Yeah, sorry. Yeah.
Yeah. So when I talk about audience interaction, how does an IP interact with its audience? There's a few aspects I like to consider, especially this is very much based on games being a very commercially driven industry, but it's like basically there's an attraction value of the IP, like how much interest will it gain, how easy will it make people to care about it or react on it, how attractive is it? And then there's the persistence of it, which is basically how for how long will people be interested in it? How long will they care? So there might be obviously a big brand or big IP has a wide reach or wide attraction, because like if I go back to the example of Lego or Star Wars, a lot of people will know that brand. If they see it, will know if they see there's a new Lego movie or new Star Wars movie, they will they will probably know about it. They will likely care about it, or at least they have an opinion about it. And then if you're talking about the persistence of an IP, it's more about for how long do people dwell on it? How much do they talk with other people around it or on it IP? What kind of community mechanics is it in the IP? And I think for games, there's a lot of games IP in general are quite strong in that sense that people tend to be very, very invested in them, and for a long time they'll start like long community threads about different IPs and the ups and downs of it. So I think that those two are interesting to think about when you look at an IP from a commercial standpoint. If we take the next slide. So this is, I guess I'm not a lawyer, so I should be a bit careful going into this, but I think it's important to understand that, and this is actually I looked up on the internet. So obviously, if an IP is if you want to claim an ownership, you can't really keep it in your just in your head. You need to sort of fix it in a tangible, expressive medium. So, and I actually read an example. If you have a talk and that talk is not recorded, what you say on that talk is not really an IP. Like those ideas you convey, it's not your IP. But if it's recorded, or if there's a slideshow like this one, we can define these slides that we bring forward. This is like our IP. I'm not sure what the value of that IP is here right now, but at least that's the theory behind it. So if you move to the next slide. So though, I mean, there's the IP, and then I think, which is the foundation, and then there's the products that comes out of it, and that's the derivative work. And so there's a IP of Star Wars. Then every single, if you create a character within the Star Wars universe, or if you create a action figurine and start sell it, obviously you need to ask for permission from the IP owner for that. And sometimes there can be some I mean, we have examples in the history, Arne Anka being one, where the discussion about where is the IP, is Disney actually owning the IP of a talking duck, or can someone else also invent a talking duck, and where's the distinction, and how much can you copyright of an IP? And I think that's quite interesting to see, because there's so many fringe cases where you take it. So, and I'm not going to go into the details of exactly how that's happening. So, I would take the next slide.
Yeah.
So we've been talking a little bit about, as Yasin mentioned, like Runatyr is we are basically working with our own IP, so we're working with someone else's IP, and I think that's in general, especially if you work within games, there's that distinction of creating your original IP or taking in someone else. And I think what is a good practice, which is the best to do, there's different factors, so there's a context you need to adhere to. And I mean, basically, what is it you want to achieve with the IP? For instance, if I'm going back to games, if I want to create, I have a gameplay mechanic. I want to create a 4-player co-op first-person shooter, and that's the important thing for me, because I have this gameplay mechanics I want to try out. Maybe the IP itself, like what IP I put on, like combine it with, is of less importance. But if I have this story that I really want to tell, if I have this a story or a character I want to portray, obviously it becomes much more important for me. I mean, it sort of prevents me from taking in an external IP. And I like to call this like the creative drive behind like the product you want to create. And I think it's important for you to sort of think about what's important for me. Is it the story I want to tell, like this specific story? Is it something else? I just want to make a beautiful movie, but the story itself could be about something. I mean, maybe it's more the visual, the aesthetics of it or something. So it's not always like one choice that's the right one to take. But I go through a little bit like what you should think about depending on if you create your own IP. And this is especially for games. So if you move to the next slide.
Yeah.
I think you moved.
Sorry.
Back. No, okay. One more.
Or one more. Yeah.
Yeah. So the best thing when you own your own IP, or you create your own IP and you apply it to a game, is that you have full creative and commercial control. That means there's no one else that's going to decide for you if what you can do, what you can say, or anything. And also any follow-ups to this, like is something you control yourself. You decide which products will be created of it. If you want to license this IP, if it becomes successful and you want to license it to someone else, it's your full right to do it. So there's a commercial value to that. And based on how well your IP is interacting with its audience, there's a monetary value you can put to it. Right. So if it's a great value with great reach and persistence that keeps on going and going, and maybe a few products connected to it, like a few derivative works, that IP becomes a commodity, which I think people like Fredrik Malmberg from Cabinet have understood a long time ago. Obviously, and that's like Disney buying Star Wars or Marvel is an example of that. They wanted that creative commercial control themselves. But when you so if you move to the next slide, when you create that IP of your own, there's a few challenges you can't ignore, and that is obviously you need to create and maintain that audience, an audience who cares about the IP. So it's not just creating a great story, you also need to create an audience for that story, and there's really no shortcuts for that. I mean, there could be, in the terms of games, you can get a publisher that helps you for that, but most publishers will ask for ownership of the IP. Same with if you create a graphical novel and if you find a publishing deal, they will ask for the publishing rights for the IP itself, because they understand the value of the IP. So if we move to the next slide. I think if you decide to, I've seen this so many times within games, if you decide to create your own IP or to develop your own game, basically, there's quite often you focus too much on the development of the IP instead of also focusing on the outreach of the IP, to take it to an audience, to think about how is this IP going to be received by the audience? How can I make sure people care about it? And I think there's so many talks about, there's so many knowledge on how to do this, which is basically marketing. So there's no use for us to go into this here, but I think it's important to understand that. It's create your own game, create your own story. It's great, but think about who's going to listen, who's going to watch it. We could go to the next slide, I think. So another way to approach it is to maybe use someone else's IP. And to be honest, I think we do it a little bit I mean, I think we could do it more, at least in the indie games development sphere. Like there's I think there's great benefits to look on both within the same platform, but also maybe looking at other stuff, like looking at books or graphical novels or something, like working together and sort of build a larger, more deep, build a larger IP or build a more depth to the IP by using another IP. Basically that was the success from Fat Shark. We've been struggling for 7 or 8 years or something with our own IPs in different shapes and forms without really hitting that mark. But when we decided to actually slap on, it sounds very crude, but like when we decided to make a game within the Warhammer universe, which were like a combination of, we knew what kind of game we wanted to do. We wanted to do a co-op, 4-player co-op game, but we also needed some kind of packaging for it to make it stand out. And because we all were big fans of the Warhammer franchise, and we felt we knew a lot about the IP, we decided to combine those two, and obviously the outcome became pretty successful. Reason for it becoming successful is obviously because I think it was passion who drove us. We knew about the IP, and we felt it could be a good fit, and we did think about why the IP was a good fit for the game and the audience we wanted to reach, which is super important. If you don't think there's an audience who cares about the IP, or if it's not the right audience for the product you want to create, there's definitely not any use for you to create an IP or to license an IP for it. If we move to the next slide, I'll try to speed up a little bit. So commercial and creative control is slightly more restricted when licensing an IP, and so that's why obviously licensing an IP comes with a cost. And there's things you need to buy to. You need to understand and sort of love the IP. I could always say, like, I mean, you need to understand the context where it's being created and the audience is trying to reach. And obviously there will be cost involved. You will have to pay licensing fee, and you cannot like sort of just create a lot of different products. You likely need to attain a permission for every product. And if we move to the next slide, if you try to use an IP which is not really fitting for the game you're doing, so another example that Fat Shark worked with a publisher, Deep Silver, and they wanted to create a side product or like a sort of a version of the Escape Dead Island Dead Island 2, Dead Island IP, which is a super successful multiplayer game. But they wanted to create a single player story-driven game through the Escape Dead Island, and it did not work well, basically because they just tried to slap on a very successful IP for sure, but on a different context. And I think that's really important to think about when you start licensing IP. It's like not only I love this, it's just such a beautiful world with such interesting characters, but is it fitting for what you want to create? And I think it's quite important to have it. So yeah, that's a little bit on the whole talk about IPs, creating your own and license it, and applying in a product and commercialize it. And with that, I think I'll leave to Yasse again.
All right, thank you. And I managed to display my first slide also. So I'll be talking about what approaches we use in development of IPs and approaches in general, and reconstructivism or reconstruction of genre in particular. And all of this started with me having written a script that I presented to Robert, and it was a script where I was trying to mythologize Swedish history in a sort of similar manner to the Western genre or Kurosawa samurai movies or something like that. And while I was writing this script that I eventually showed to Robert, I was looking for inspiration, and I was watching a lot of interviews, and one interview that particularly caught my attention was an interview with Quentin Tarantino. So all of this is actually Quentin Tarantino's fault that we're here today. Not really, but in a sense, he may have something to do with the approach that I was attempting then, and he inspired me, I think, with in that interview. Anyway, he was talking about and also Sergio Leone, and how they, in his opinion, were the greatest reconstructivists of genre. And of course, Sergio Leone, we know from the spaghetti westerns and how he revamped the Western genre, and it's almost like today is the Western genre. Is it John Wayne, or is it Clint Eastwood, who is the archetypical Western hero, cowboy hero? I don't know. But anyway, Jean-Pierre Melville was sort of the precursor to the new wave of French film in the 60s that sort of rebelled against the boring bourgeois French film industry of the time. And Jean-Pierre Melville was already doing movies in I think even the 40s, and he was inspired by American gangster movies of the 30s and American film noir of the 40s. And what he did was he did his version, his French take on the American gangster movie. And there is actually Quentin Tarantino. I mean, he probably watched a lot of Melville movies, I have no doubt. He also named his company A Band Apart after a Melville movie. Anyway, he read a review that, so I'm gonna try to switch slides here. Let's see, my computer, oops. Oh, we're, okay. Am I still sharing this, sharing my screen?
You're still sharing, but it's the same picture. It's the
right. And I want to, okay, I'll try to stop sharing and share it again then, because I, let's see, sorry about this, share screen. And then we go back here and let's see. Okay. Okay, let's see. Okay. Do you, no, you can't see this, or?
I see Safari.
Right. Okay. Why?
Should I share the screen instead?
Okay. No, maybe I managed now. Okay. Sorry about that. Yeah. Okay. So anyway, Tarantino. I mean, there has been an ongoing debate where film critics have tried to pinpoint Tarantino's style of filmmaking and what genre is he making films in, and actually he transcends genre. And I cannot say like one genre that is Quentin Tarantino, or a name for what types of films he directs. But I can tell you how he found his aesthetic, and that was when he read a review of Jean Pierre Melville's film A Bande Séparée. It's called A Band of Outsiders in English. And the reviewer from the New Yorker, she wrote that it's as if a French poet took an ordinary, banal American crime novel and told it to us in terms of the romance and the beauty he read between the lines. And that was Tarantino's eureka moment. He said, that's my aesthetic. That's how I'm gonna make films. This was at an early age. So, and this is Tarantino's interpretation of that quote. It's as if a couple of movie crazy young Frenchmen were in a coffee house and they've taken a banal American crime novel and they're making a movie out of it, but not on the novel, but on the poetry that they read between the lines. And I think that's quite mind-boggling and really opens up a lot of possibilities in storytelling and how one can approach storytelling from a possibly more subtextual perspective, or a just a different angle, really. And yeah, that's my aesthetic. And so, I mean, so what is constructivism of genre? Is it portraying the subtext or the meta layer, or I'm not sure, but I think it's like finding, basically doing that. And of course, there are a lot of stories out there to be told. I think, and there's also this possibility that we really try to, I mean, not reconstructing genre for the sake of complicating stuff or trying to, I mean, that wouldn't work. But if one could find a way to tell Swedish history or whatever it may be from a different angle, I think that is really inspiring and interesting. And that's one of the approaches we use in IP development and storytelling. So I think that was basically what we wanted to tell you and share today. I don't know if Robert has anything to add.
No, I think we got it to just 30 minutes. This is spot on. So, no, I think this is such a broad subject and quite complex, and you can sort of go in any direction with it and talk a lot about it. So I think if there's any questions or like on our view or approach, I think that would be good.
Yeah.
To take from that.
Yeah, I can. A little disclaimer is that, like, for instance, the script that I was mentioning, where I was trying to mythologize Swedish history, that isn't published yet, or we are we are working on a graphic novel based on that script at this point. But and further down the line, I mean, it's a movie script to begin with, so we hopefully will see that on movie screens or the TV channel. But yeah, a little disclaimer there. But we're open for any questions.
Yeah, super. Well, I have a lot of questions.
Me too.
Nice. I'll stop sharing this.
Yes.
Yeah,
Thank you.
perfect. Super. I think from my side, it would be interesting to know, how do you actually claim an IP?
Like the the practicalities from it. So obviously there's a number of I mean, you can trademark it, or you can't trademark it. You can copyright the IP, which is a legal procedure that you do, and it's a bit complicated and quite costly, and it's not like there's not something you can do worldwide quite easily. So you would need to go. There's a through Patent- och registreringsverket in Sweden, and they could probably help you take your sort of copyrights to European Union, and then there's this similar in the US. So it's probably it's enough complicated for people to actually use lawyers for it. But I think what I do, this is very personal. I'm not saying it's a perfect practice, but and it's a good way to sort of check that it's available. We try to come up with a name for the IP, and it could be the working name, and you claim that domain, at least, because then you have a paper trail or crumb trail of like we did register a domain at this specific date, and that's a good way to start doing it. And then I think, as I mentioned, like put something on paper with a stamp on it. Put a data room somewhere where you put a lot of things in that sort of has a stamp or date attached to it. Would be a good way forward. At least then you can go back in history and say like, okay, so this was written here. But in general, like even though if you haven't shared it with anyone, it's really difficult for you to sort of claim ownership. So you need to start sharing it with, like, in one way or another.
When getting that copyright, you like deliver a lot of sketches or an art book or I mean.
I guess for depending on what kind, you can do it for different, like you can do it for the visual part, or if it's just like, I mean, the easiest, the most straightforward thing is for a name, like a company name or IP name. So that's just a name. But then you can continue to do it like the logotype, the brand recognition. I'm trying to remember the names of it, and yet again, I'm not an expert at this. There's I would turn to a lawyer to get like the best input. But there's a process, but then there's like different layers where you take it for different parts. But obviously, like if you release a game, that itself is sort of a claim for that specific IP. Or if you release a movie, that would be also like you can't really do that's a good.
That's a good start.
That's a good start.
but back in the day, you used to have to, or the advice was that you send, if you were going to send a movie script to somebody, you should send one to yourself and not open the envelope. So that was, you had a stamp and a date and proof of.
Yeah.
I mean, the glue was proof.
An analog data room, which is, I think, is a good thing.
Okay. On that question, then, people, can they be IP? Because we've seen that like Vin Diesel and Keanu Reeves have now moved into the gaming world.
Yeah,
that's a good question.
I guess there's if they create a brand about like Peter Forsberg is not an IP, but I guess like his underwear. I'm not sure if he has underwear, but his underwear is definitely an IP.
You mean he goes commando?
Yeah. No, I mean that's it's but yeah, obviously, like, I mean, you can't like this is really stepping on deep water, but I guess I can't put like Vin Diesel's name on my game claiming he's doing something in it, which it hasn't, because I guess that's in that sense it's automatically copyrighted. Like you can't put someone else's name against their will on something and tell them they are like creators of that IP.
But that question is interesting, because we have a project that we're looking at where the idea for the project came from a musician who doesn't want to be part of the project. So, we're supposed to tell his story, and it's like, is he the IP then? Sort of. I mean, that's interesting. But I think, and that's something we will have to find out, sort of, with that project. Anyhow,
it's getting more complicated. That's for sure. But this extends past their names as well, because this is their likeness, because they're playing different characters in all these different ways. So it's their likeness as well. That's starting to become important as well.
Yeah, and I mean, definitely with the as technology evolves and you can sort of recreate someone to look exactly like Vin Diesel or whoever, and I guess that's I'm super curious about it. I think I'll definitely read up more on, like, can you depict someone and put it in a game? Probably not. Yeah. I can't put like a lookalike in it. So I guess if you look at games, the what you call it, the football, like the FIFA, who's always having all the license rights for the games and the players, in comparison to PES or Pro Level Soccer, who doesn't, is a good indication of where like those player names are sort of restricted and where they can go and not. So it's definitely a really interesting subject.
I think it's interesting also. I mean, we had a discussion with one of our lawyers about IPs in games and like using brands like Coke or 7-Eleven or something. That's not something you can do in a game. You need a license to do that as well.
Yes.
But how does that transfer to like comics or movies? Can you use a can of Coke in a comic? Will that be a problem?
That's a good question, but I think I mean, you can in Sweden you're allowed to as long as your camera is handheld, you can film wherever you like. But if you put a tripod on the ground, then you're claiming the ground, so you need to have a permit to put it there. I mean, that's a really banal example, but that's actually the law, or the what do you call it? I mean, the juridiska aspect of it.
So you could if you did it with a hand cam, you could sort of film a Coke sign.
But what I'm saying is that you could go out on the street in Stockholm and film somebody, and if somebody is passing by with a Coke can, that's not illegal showing that. I mean, you have the right to document streets in Stockholm or wherever in Sweden. So, and there are plenty of Coke signs and 7-Elevens and McDonald's. So in a documentary sense, you're allowed, and I guess, I mean, that's a good question, but it's.
I actually have a clarification from Sylvain, who's a part of this. Great. He says you cannot use an existing brand in comics without authorization of the brand. So that would mean that you actually can't use the Coke or whatever in a comics either. You need actually the license to do that.
Did Sylvain get approval from Skitsystem?
We should ask him that.
Okay, another question then. How do you know who owns an IP?
There are resources to find out. I can't figure out the names of those right now, but there are resources. And I mean, if you reach out to Patent and Registreringsverket, you can Google those things, and most likely you will find out at least like brands. Then IPs could be and you should ask Yasin about that, because he's been on hunt for several IPs. So what's the approach there, Yasse? Is it? I mean, it's a lot of Googling and.
Sorry, what
to find out who owns an IP. Like a brand is quite easy, but an IP.
Yeah, that's you'll have to. That's basically research and trying to find the agent of the writer or the artist, and then trying to get a hold of whoever represents the author. So I mean, Googling and emailing is a good start.
Yeah. So there's no online repository for all this information.
For brands, there are
probably, not that I know of, like off the bat.
Good. Continuing on that, like if you want to go into making IPs or like borrowing IPs, what's the cost? Where are we talking about? Like, is it free? Is it millions of dollars? Where do you end up if you want to?
Somewhere between there.
Somewhere, of course.
The usual. I mean, if in the US, for instance, the procedure is usually that you option the rights, and then during that term of while you're optioning the rights, you will have to find a setup, or try to like set up a production, or if it's a film, for instance, based on a novel. And then either the option expires, or during the term you can purchase the IP for audiovisual media. And the option, it can be free, or it can be anywhere from free up to I don't think like millions of dollars. I mean, of course, it depends on what it is, but it could be free, or it could cost, say, 100,000 SEK or dollars, up to 100,000 SEK maybe. And then the purchase price will be much more. And I have percentages of the purchase price based on budget, etc. I don't have those numbers right in front of me, but that's generally how that's how the process looks. What it looks like.
Is it a fixed upfront cost, or is it depending on sales, or how
revenue
usually
share
translate? Yeah.
The purchase price is generally a fixed upfront price based on, I think, a lot of the times on the budget of the project. So if it's a $100 million Hollywood movie, then the purchase price will be quite high, of course. But the option is deductible from the purchase price.
I would say also it's a little bit depending on like what industry we're talking about. Like game IPs are, or licensing I know, for instance, Games Workshop, they tend to use with percentages, so you don't pay an upfront fee, and I think that's more common within games, that you instead you pay a percentage of the revenue, so you do a rev share deal there, and but I guess there's all different types of setup there as well. I mean, in games, quite common is that there's an IP owner that's actually approaching someone, asking them to do an adaptation of that IP. So like the publishers say, okay, can you do a game in this IP? And then there's the whole package comes with like there's a payment, dev advance payment for you to do it, and then after costs been recouped, there's a royalty rev split from the IP as well. In general, the IP owner is always on the upper hand here. So I think, as Yasin mentioned, like when you purchase the audiovisual, you purchase the rights. I mean, the IP itself is like a full buyout of the IP. Like in terms of when Disney bought Star Wars, is a different. Like I can't even. I don't think you can say how much the cost is for that. But I mean, it's so depending on what kind of, like, what the scale is. But it's in general, I think it's my first impression when we started doing this is that the price is lower than you sort of expect. But that's because an IP, the value of the IP, I guess it's depending on what kind of IP you approach. But there's still a lot of work needed to be done when you license an IP to do something with it, and it's I mean, that's obviously something that reflects in the cost.
I spoke to an IP expert earlier that we had as a speaker, and he mentioned that like the price differs which characters you use. I think he referred to a Marvel movie for that instance, that they added like Batman in the last scenes, or it was maybe a Marvel game. They added Batman just for the last scenes. But
That's DC.
Yeah, DC. Oh, sorry. He was so like expensive when you started using him. But you could use the universe first, so that the costs were like different. Is that something you think of when you develop games, or how is it like a visible cost?
Yeah, I mean, one of the titles I worked with when I was with Raw Fury was West of Dead, where we used not maybe an IP, but we used a famous talent. We used Ron Perlman for the voice acting of the game. And obviously, I mean, this sounds harsh, but his name were part of, like, the price tag came with his name. So it's like if it was a big difference if we had lines that would bring him into the studio like 5 days, or if we had lines that would bring him into studios like 1 day or 2 days, like sort of the scope of the number of lines. It was just a narrative, so it wasn't that immensely. I mean, I think we had him for 3 days, which was within the budget. But if it would be a full story-driven, like 20 hours game, that would be another thing. But for us, we still, I mean, Ron Perlman, his name appeared, and I mean, also part of that thing is that you pay for everything. So and I'm sure this is not just for Ron Perlman. I think it's a standard. Like, you pay for him appearing, doing the voice acting. But if you want to do like interviews, you pay extra for that. If you want to do behind the scenes footage, that's like another set. And then if you want to do live stage appearance, what like Keanu Reeves did with Cyberpunk, that's another fee as well. So there's a lot of different tiers.
When Fat Shark moved into Warhammer, did you get the whole universe, or did you just get to pick those characters and
we claimed,
was it an extra cost per race?
No, not extra cost per race, but we claimed genre sort of. But that was for our sake as well. So it was a fixed fee, a percentage on the deal, but then they promised us they would not let anyone else do a 4-player co-op first-person game in the same genre. So obviously they did Total War, but that was another genre, so it was okay. So it was mostly that we were promised they were sort of we got our fantasy 4-player co-op option, one could say, even though we didn't pay for that option. And I'm sure, I must say, Games Workshop is in general very, very accommodating. They're really easy to work with in terms of IPs, and they understand the value of their IPs a lot. Like in sense of they understand that there's a lot of potential in them, in the adaptations, and they really try to accommodate it. So which I think it's good for them, obviously.
Yeah. More should copy them.
Yeah, in that sense, definitely.
I actually have one last question on that, and that's actually how you approach an IP owner. What's important to bring into that discussion? What should you think about?
I think it's important that they feel that you can. How should I? What word am I looking for? That they feel comfortable with what you can, how you will handle the IP, and that they feel confident with that you can. I mean, you can of course have this in your agreement in writing, that you won't like exploit it in a unsuiting manner, but I think that it's important that they see that we can, or somebody can bring value to the IP and also take care of it in a honorable and respectful and in a respectful way, actually.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, that's the whole thing. When we approached Games Workshop once again about Vermintide, we basically said like, hey, we've been fans of Games Workshop since we were kids, and this is a long-term dream of something we want to do, which were like, it was true, but we did spice the whole thing a little bit. But I mean, and I think that honest discussion about when they actually realized that we were fans and not only saw an opportunity, that did tip the iceberg. And then obviously, I think next step would be see like, are these people capable of doing what they set out to do? So, but I like being honest with your interest in the IP, and I think that's for yourself as well. If you can't feel passionate about it, then you should probably not do it just because everyone loves Pokemon, so I'm going to do a Pokemon game. No, that was a bad example, but like if you need to understand and really feel for it.
Good.
Yeah, I'm done. Do you have more questions?
No, I'm
so really happy we could have you. It was a really interesting topic. We could probably have a day or more just talking about this.
Oh yeah.
So I'm super happy you can join us and just describe what you're doing. And good luck with Runatyr. It's fantastic to have a Swedish IP company.
Thank you for having us.
Amazing. Yeah,
thanks.
It's a pleasure.
Yeah. And I mean, if there's anyone that have follow-up questions and stuff like that, I think both me and Yasin are quite approachable on. Like, feel free to reach out to us.
Runatyr.com.
Yeah, Runatyr.com or on LinkedIn or through you guys and Arctic Game Labs is like, if you have any question or any ideas or thoughts, we are always.
Yeah,
super.
If you have an exciting IP.
Yeah.
Sounds great.
Okay. All right.
Goodbye and Merry Christmas.
Merry Christmas.
Right.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.